Mischka is a student of history and sociology, a pianist, composer, and activist. These are some of the categories that Mischka occupies, but there is so much more about her, and over the next few months, I am hopeful we will get to know her, her analysis, and her work much more. In this, our first episode together, we talk about socialism, good and bad. We talk about the 1968 Prague Spring. We talk about dividing a country, identity, activism, and how we are often imperceptibly molded by history. In short, it doesn't take us long to get into a lot of interesting topics. Thank you, Mischka, for your time, and I look forward to the next one. 2 and a mic clocking out. Enjoy.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro tu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye tu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinjie tu under mic. Wola wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako moment ndi and a mic podcast makende.
I'm joined by Mischka for the first time. Hello, Mischka. How are you?
Hi there. I'm fine. Thank you.
Good. Now, people don't really know sometimes how a podcast channel, a small one like mine, gets their guests. And a lot of the time it's by reference. So you are an unplanned, fantastic gift presented to me by Anna. So thank you, Anna, for this. And what's interesting is the areas in which your interests coincide with the podcast. So you are a student of sociology and history, and on top of that, you are also a pianist and a composer.
Yeah, that's right. I finished my studies of music in the UK. That was for my bachelor degree. And then I decided to do my master's in sociology, which I already completed, but I still keep on basically observing the society and wondering what's going on right now.
I'll tell you, there are lots of us wondering what's going on right now. I'm not actually sure if anybody has the ability to have a complete view of what's going on. But what is quite clear is there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world.
It's quite chaotic right now. Indeed, I agree. And that's why I think it's so important to try to create some kind of peacefulness. And that's why I try to concentrate on the music and on making this happen through, just connecting to the people who like to enjoy some kind of nice times and create as much as peace as possible.
Yeah. Which also, not to bring up a point which we'd kind of planned to discuss, but something that you remind me of. I read a lot of messages on social media about people who really want to enjoy their lives, so younger people. But when they are so heavily affected by the news that they see and the suffering that they are aware of, they find it difficult. They start to feel a bit guilty. Why should I go out and see my friends when other people's friends have died? Why should I go to a restaurant? Other people don't have the money for this. Why should I go to a dance club? Because other people, they don't even have a dance club anymore. It was destroyed. That's not the way to bring about change. As in, if we feel guilty for the small pleasures that we can have, which sustain us to be able to then channel our activism elsewhere, we need to be able to have these outlets. And I think that's one of the things that people like you present us with, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really important to mention, that without looking firstly about ourselves and looking after ourselves, we couldn't really share the inspiration or the positive kind of power that we might have if we would like to make some changes or just bring awareness to certain problems. So I kind of believe, and thanks for referring to Anna, because exactly that's the kind of lady with who we were actually working on a project for collecting some money for Ukraine after the war started. And basically, we just realized that in order to make people aware of certain problems that needs to be addressed, we cannot do it if we don't look after ourselves. So indeed, it really is connected. But I must also admit that sometimes I can also observe, or I've been observing back in times when I was still living in Slovakia, that maybe, some of my peers wouldn't be really questioning, like, where are we living? What is our society about? What is the background? And like, they would be a little bit, maybe sometimes rather ignorant. And I think that this is maybe also the kind of problem that we have, that basically we should all kind of start to realize that we all individuals have responsibilities, and we all have maybe kind of possibility to make things maybe not better. So maybe not right now, we cannot really solve the big wars happening, but we can just become aware of the issues, and then we can start to think about potential improvements, or what can we kind of change, and or what should we rather avoid. Maybe let's start just with this. Let's start with like not reading fake news and not believing them without checking the sources properly, for example.
Yeah, I think you raised some fantastic points. And what's also interesting is that kind of draws into focus a very small debate I had yesterday with somebody. We were talking about the effects of colonialism, and he mentioned how there were good as well as bad parts of the British Empire. And I wanted to say that, sorry, but there is no way to equate the level of bad with anything good that may have occurred. And to forget all of these things, some people do this because it makes them feel that they can live their lives easier. Ignorance is a choice for a lot of people, because I'm so sure that a lot of our younger generations are really intelligent because they're forced to be intelligent. But when they don't want to think about these things, it's a choice. So that ignorance is a choice because it makes them feel more comfortable with the way that they live their lives. And I think we should help people to realize, look, you're not guilty for what has happened in the past, but you're definitely responsible, as you just said, for making a change today and tomorrow. So come and let's work together on that. And I think these are the kinds of positive approaches we need to take. I don't want to blame anybody for what happened in the past, but let's fix today. And we need everybody's participation in that.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe not everybody also has like this kind of huge courage straight away, because I think it also takes a courage to be able to realize that there might be, some trauma or some bad decision made in past. Of course, for that kind of things, you also need a lot of courage firstly. But I still exactly believe like that we can make things better, because, for example, mentioning the Ukrainian people, like when the war started here in Berlin, then I met really young guys who just decided to organize the whole protest, and then they actually created a Vichy organization that then created all the protests, and they are right now quite big cultural institution, and it's wonderful to see how strong the people are, how together they basically support each other, and of course they have, sometimes good times, like they also go for a party in Berlin, they also go to a restaurants and everything, but they just are together and they are trying to solve the issues that is going on in Ukraine, and they try to support the Ukraine as much as they can from abroad, which is really important, of course.
Yeah. And we're having our discussion with obviously the backdrop of also another conflict currently taking place in Gaza, which has also drawn into focus some of the pre-existing prejudices within German society. But this is something that we should perhaps talk about at a future point, so as not to introduce too many diverse political elements within our first conversation, because that would be a shame. But people may have noticed then, and you also mentioned too that of your Slovakian heritage, but you were born in a different country, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I was born a few months before Czechoslovakia was divided into Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Yeah. So, I mean, that must be quite interesting as well. So you were essentially born in exactly the same place that you grew up, but it was a different country, which is quite funny.
Yes, definitely. And that was also part of the history lessons that we had at gymnasium, for example. It's like I was born in Slovakia, but the last 100 years before, it had so many different names. It was also, socialist Czechoslovakia at some point, and many different names. So it was kind of like a journey that I went through, a historical journey. And then I realized, and right now I'm living in Slovakia. But hold on, my mother is half kind of Czech because she grew up in Czech Republic. So I think was just everything is kind of influenced, and maybe that's why I'm also concentrating more on the conflict of Russian and Ukraine, because like I feel for the people over there. Because in history, obviously the Prague Spring and the whole influence of Soviet Union on Czechoslovakia was also huge, and also shaped me as a person and had impact on the way how I, approach my music, how I also approach the piano, how I've been taught to play the piano. So that's why I always go back to the history, because I think there are certain answers to who we are.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned some very interesting events from the past. You also mentioned the word socialism, and reading some of the notes, I have to compliment and also let people be aware. So when we talking about certain topics, I sent you one or two sort of very short sentences about what we could talk about. And then you responded with this massive text. And I thought, oh, wow, that's fantastic. So, I mean, that shows, on the one hand, your enthusiasm and need to talk about things, but also perhaps this latent, not necessarily pain, but perhaps there is an element of some suffering, recognition of suffering from that history. And I find it fascinating to talk about these things. And I made the note here, the different faces of socialism, because I like to consider myself as a socialist, but the experience that you talk about with regards to socialism is a completely different kind of socialism. And I think sometimes people put all of these different things all together, and that's politically confusing. Mm. So, I mean, if we start from where you also mentioned the Prague Spring, because I have a feeling a lot of people may not have heard about this. Would you like to sort of introduce what that was about and what it tried to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So thank you. I am also glad that you enjoyed reading the text. I just wanted to, of course, put my thoughts together. And of course, that was also, a question of definition, the words that we are using needs to be defined. And of course, in the political constitution, it also often happens that we end up having certain system which ideally would have been good if, if it would really work. But in this case, the socialism that we had back then in Czechoslovakia, of course, it had some, maybe nice ideas, like ideally everybody should have been kind of equal. But what actually happened in the end was that people were not happy enough, because then they couldn't really be individuals. Prague Spring was exactly a point of time in our history when politician Alexander Dubček, who is originally from Slovakia, decided, or kind of introduced an idea of having socialism with a human face. That means that it would have been maybe a little bit more so to say, empathic towards people, because the socialism that was there after the Second World War, which has been kind of decided for Czechoslovakia, as a result of, for example, the Potsdam Agreement and the meeting that the three main presidents of Russia, USA, and Prime Minister from England have had. As a result of it, we had a socialism, and then Alexander Dubček was like, hey, but let's make it a little bit more friendly, so to say. Let's allow people to have their own little businesses, because, for example, socialism, everything had to be given to a state. So, for example, my father's side family had a little farm, and they would love to have their own little farm further, but because it was a communism, they had to give everything to the state. Some of them had to go to prison, for example, for a certain time, and another disadvantage was that people couldn't really travel. Wasn't really possible to go for a trip to Western Germany or even to Austria or Paris. Like my parents were not free, so to say. They could travel maybe exactly like to Yugoslavia or Russia, but to have such a freedom as we younger generation have right now, that's something that I like to take obviously advantage of, and that's why I'm also living abroad for many years, I think. And this idea of making Slovakia and the socialism with human face was unfortunately not something supported by Russia, obviously. And then all of a sudden, in August 1968, basically Czechoslovakia was invaded by Warsaw troops, and they basically stayed until Russian state with their army until 1989. So I just remember the stories, my parents would tell me, or also people in school or the citizens that experienced it, how scary and traumatizing it was to wake up in the morning or in the night and having the tanks around and having the army around, and then the politicians were asking people to stay peaceful and to not go into a conflict, because then the war could have started. And this way, the kind of idealistic, almost romantic idea of socialism with human face was quite suppressed and led to an era of normalization, which then also exactly had an impact on, obviously, artists, because then there was a censorship, which we can also see right now in Russia. So basically, if you would like to write a lyrics, it must have been always, written in a way that it would kind of please the socialists and the government. And if there was something rebellious, you might have even end up in a prison at some point. But I mean, that's me. I wasn't really growing there, and like myself, I was born already into a democratic Slovakia, but it's still very young democracy, and that's why it's also pretty fragile.
Sure, and we can see this in some other Eastern European states which have long histories. But those histories also include, as indeed you have indicated, a lot of foreign influence on their destinies, on their fate, on how they're managed. And sometimes there is this, with young democracies, this fragility which allows them to sometimes take the wrong step in a certain direction, or perhaps to be more easily influenced by more powerful potential allies. But when we look at, you mentioned the events which took place in 1968, and it also reminded me that the 1960s were a crazy time, as in 1963, you had the assassination of Kennedy, you had the growth of the Vietnam War, you had the space race, then you had further assassinations in the US, you had civil rights. There were all sorts of different kinds of economic models being propagated around the time. It really was a period of transition. And through this period of transition, you also had the hippie movement, flower power, people trying to give hope to those who didn't have it. And once again, just as you were saying before, the way art tries to find a way to give people hope, belief, this feeling of a relief from the reality that they suffer. I think there's an inherent beauty in that. So in a grey ground, there are always shoots of floral beauty that come through.
Exactly. Yeah. And also what it gives to people is definitely, I can say that the kind of feeling of, connection and of belonging, because we are all individuals and we are going through our own, individual experiences. But what music, for example, can do is that it really wonderful connects the people and it makes you belong, even though you come from a country and you are on your own somewhere in a foreigner country. Once someone starts to sing, everybody might, join you, or you have a little concert somewhere, you really start to feel like in the end of the day we are all really equal.
Yeah, which is a simple and yet extremely beautiful and powerful thought as well, and a reality, something that a lot of us agree with. Unfortunately, some people in power don't, but that's something we're working on. So let's also talk a bit more about your music, because you are yourself going through a little bit of a lifestyle change, and you're heading very much into a development of your music. Would you like to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Yes, indeed. It's always about finding your feet and questioning where you are right now in this journey. Because I started really early when I was 6 years old, it really does feel like I wouldn't be able to live without the music. But on the other hand, let's face it, it's also not something that is completely simple to live off. And also, even though, I'm being critical towards the system in Slovakia of the socialism back then, but I'm also not super positive about this system either, because the kind of aggressive capitalism is also not giving many opportunities to young people to live from the music. There are many societies or many companies that are not really giving the chances, which is a shame, unfortunately. I'm concentrating on, despite all of these things, on kind of exploring my own power and my own ability to, feel free and to basically just express my emotions and my experiences of also exactly living in Slovakia. I am coming from quite little town, and sometimes when I compose, I like to imagine that I am in a cottage somewhere in the mountains, and I'm thinking of my ancestors and of my grandparents who used to live there, and they used to play accordion, for example. Or I'm just imagining certain quite often really natural kind of visions that I'm inhabiting when I am composing. So I'm working on different compositions, but at the same time, I, of course, like to also sing, and I also like different genres. I love to do jazz, for example. Step by step, it takes me a long time, to be honest with you, because as a classically trained person, jazz is completely a different approach towards music, but that also inspires me to basically have the kind of courage and go through something different and to experiment a little bit. So music is definitely a freedom, and I like to share it, and I am grateful for every person who has the time or has the chance to listen to some of my compositions, because I know how fast lives we are all living, and basically the informations are coming from all over the side all the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm completely bombarded myself, so it's being also having this kind of time, and creating the space for myself is also sometimes even hard for me to create, because I always find something else to do or to read or so. But right now I am working on my LP in a cooperation with one wonderful music producer, Billy Mello. He is living in Mallorca, so we all do it just online, which is also kind of, experiment for me. For him, probably not, because he is very experienced producer who's been back then living in Berlin for many years. But for me, it's quite, brings a lot of fresh air, and that's something that I appreciate and I love a lot.
And we will include in the podcast notes some links to your music and your performances so that people can go and listen to you and see you perform as well. So that's something we'll definitely include. People may think, okay, 1 minute, that was a very crazy jump. We're 1 minute talking 1968 Prague Spring, and then we jump into your music. But there is a connection, and you alluded to it before with regards to the way in which you were taught the piano and the way in which you approached music. So some other sort of historical elements between 1968 and 1989 we will talk about, if not in this episode, but in a future episode. But do you want to talk a little bit about that process of learning music in the way you did, and how that culturally was perhaps impacted by the political system of the time?
Sure, yeah. Basically, of course, it's quite a big jump, but why I also like to connect the politics and the music is exactly because I believe that the artists, maybe not all of them, but some of them do have the ability to reflect upon, the situation that is happening. And I also get quite inspired just by looking at the stories of, for example, Czech singers who, despite the fact that they were incredibly talented and they wanted to be kind of free within their expression, they rather were suppressed because they were not supporting the propaganda. So this is the reason why I always kind of make the connections between history and music, but it also comes from my family, of course, because as I mentioned, we were being all influenced, but my family, of course, as well, with the farming and everything, into the extent that, my father particularly is not a big supporter of Soviet Union. Let's put it that way. And then when there was an opportunity in the 90s, probably for my parents to, give an education to their children, they basically decided that they will, borrow money and that they will give us a piano, which was a really beautiful gesture for which I wanted to be, also thankful and to show my appreciation. So I was really disciplined student, and I had a teacher who was quite conservative, but still she had amazing taste. So thanks to my teacher Viera Kalivodova, I could play from time to time also songs which otherwise other students wouldn't play, because it's been all still affected by the typical pedagogical way of let's play only classical music, and the students don't have a choice on what songs they are playing. So, but my teacher was a little bit unconventional, maybe in the right way. So I could sometimes play a Beatles or Bohemian Rhapsody from Queens, and it brought definitely a pleasure, and that's what the music is about. So the education in Slovakia with the music education can reflect the situation and the society. And I still have many friends who also were very temperamental and very talented, but they they didn't have the luck as me to basically get the right teacher. But I also, of course, was really, at some point I just wanted to play piano quite intensively. It just brought me a really wonderful opportunity to express myself, and I was definitely hugely inspired by classical composers. Then my taste started to evolve. So I loved Schubert. That was probably the piece that inspired me the most, or Chopin, of course, also Dvořák or Janáček. And from there, I realized that maybe I can also get always better and better. And then I started to be interested in film music. And then I went to Denmark for a certain time in order to be really focused on the music that otherwise I wouldn't play in Slovakia, in the Slovak school. But after 6 months, I came back, and then my teacher was like, "Oh, look at you, you obviously put some time into practicing." And I was like, yes, indeed, because I could also play neo-classical music, which is a type of music that I like to say I'm composing myself right now.
Okay, all right. And you also, as you said, you studied in the UK too. So you've definitely kind of introduced a lot of different infusions from different musical styles, I guess. And next week you're off to another continent as well. So you're definitely sowing the seeds of your music in different areas. You're going to entertain different crowds. But you've also been doing lots of really cool events up until now as well, which has given you the confidence to then say, yeah, I'm going to take this step. How excited are you at the juncture at which you stand now?
Yeah, I love to basically travel. That's, of course, a passion that, as I mentioned, I am really grateful for having it, because hearing through all my childhood the fact that it's not always, a given, then it's like, of course, something that I like to connect with music making and meeting other people and creating events with other artists, and to get inspired by the stories of other artists. And lately I had the chance to get to know a Slovak writer who's been presenting her own book in Berlin, for example. And then you can find out that people want their voices, for example, to be heard, in different ways of art form. Some are writers, some are painters, and I happen to be a musician, and I love to cooperate with also visual artists or also with writers. And I like to believe that my music also can inspire the other artists. So, for example, they can get into a flow, and then they say sometimes that they really enjoy listening to the songs while they are for example, painting or so. So, as I said, it's a great opportunity to connect basically internationally, and it's something that kind of gives me meaning and gives me hope for future.
Yeah, very good. And so, you're ending 2023 with this fantastic trip, and then you've also got an LP coming out, or you're still in the process of producing, I guess, for 2024. These are really cool projects, aren't they, for you to have in front of you?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. I also really appreciate the opportunities to just, go further and to basically compose more and more. Like the late kind of feedback I have received from the wonderful Slovak Institute here in Berlin was to cooperate in 2024 on all the literature evenings, for example, because they find the storytelling and the symbiosis between music and the reading of the books really useful and really harmonious. But yes, firstly, I'm going to New York, and I'm gonna play at 33 Maiden Lane, down Manhattan, for Arts on Heaven, which is really wonderful institution, which basically supports all artists from all over the world. And I'm gonna play for them for the second time, because first time they kind of randomly found me when I played in the New World Trade Center in 2022, which was the very first time I went to New York, and I said that it's gonna be the most beautiful memory because the piano is not there anymore. But I all of a sudden appear to be in the highest building, of the Manhattan, having this wonderful grand piano, which was artistically sprayed by one painter, who I'm probably gonna meet again this time. And that's that kind of feeling when you are really very fulfilled and inspired for future.
Fantastic. And that's a great place for us to take a pause. I'm looking forward to a lot more political analysis, sociological analysis, and also musical infusion. Maybe we can put some of your music into our narratives too, just as how the Slovak Institute has done. Thank you very, very much, Mischka. It's a real pleasure to basically meet you as well. I haven't seen you before. And then to straight away go into this conversation and in the way that you have, with the enthusiasm that you have, I'm extremely grateful and thank you for that.
Of course, anytime. And it's been also a wonderful experience for me. And thanks for hosting me on your podcast.
Two and a mic. Two.